Hey guys, it's Danconia and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Week 13 results. So, it's been a pretty bonkers week in the Overwatch League, hasn't it? And actually, I've really enjoyed it. I think this has been one of the most chaotic weeks of Overwatch League action since, perhaps last season? Perhaps well into the early days of last season, because everything has just been all over the place. Echo has completely blown some teams up and, been really beneficial for some other teams. And she's just completely turned a lot of things on its head. And so we've had some really erroneous results this week. We've had some dominant stomps. We've had some really close matches. We've had matches that have looked completely different from one half of the match to the second half of the match. It's honestly been chaos. There is one team in particular that has come off very, very badly from what we have seen this week, and they will have to, we'll see them in a minute, but they will have to account for what's quite gone wrong this week, because it really has gone wrong. Anyway, let's get into these results then, and on Saturday, May the 2nd, we saw the Guangzhou Charge taking on the Seoul Dynasty, and I said it was one of these teams. It's Seoul Dynasty. Seoul Dynasty have had possibly one of the worst weeks I've seen an Overwatch League team have. I'm not going to lie. They've not turned up. They just haven't turned up. So they get 3-0'd by Guangzhou Charge, and it's not close. I can now tell you I think this is the second fastest series in history, because the Shanghai Seoul game last week overtook the Florida Mayhem Boston Uprising game. So I think the top three quickest series in history are now Shanghai Dragons versus Seoul Dynasty, Guangzhou Charge versus Seoul Dynasty, and Florida Mayhem versus Boston Uprising last week. So Seoul Dynasty have been on the end of 2 3-0s in a row where it's literally been done in record time. Not a great look. Not a great look. And that also crosses the kind of meta barrier. They got absolutely pummeled by Shanghai, but we kind of thought that was because Shanghai was strong. And I'm thinking less so now after what's happened to Seoul this week. But again, that's a very big issue. Seoul, Profit did not look good on the Echo. And this is the first time I think I've ever said this. We always thought Profit was a very, very flexible player, but his Echo, honestly, was the worst in the league this weekend. It just was. He was not copying ideal targets. He had an ult cancelled when he copied Sombra. He had an EMP cancelled by, actually it was in the other match. So, it's a really bad look from Seoul this week, and a lot of work to do. But, for goodness sake, just don't play the Echo. Just play anything else but the Echo, Seoul, because you need something different. When we saw Seoul on more enclosed points, like Control Center of Lijiang Tower and Mecha Base of Busan, we actually saw them do okay, because they were able to go back to the May Reaper. So, Seoul Dynasty are certainly a team that don't thrive in chaos. However, Guangzhou Charge, very good win for them. Nero was especially good on that Echo. Completely outplayed Profit at every turn. But then again, everyone did this week. So, Guangzhou Charge, really good win for them. Really good win for them. But moving on to the next match then, and this was the big match of the weekend. This was the New York Excelsior taking on the Shanghai Dragons. So, Shanghai Dragons, as I mentioned just now, completely swept the Seoul Dynasty last week, when we were expecting the Seoul Dynasty to be one of the better teams in Asia and in the league completely. New York have been right up with Shanghai, and this was the argument that everyone was making. Who is better in Asia? Is it Shanghai or is it New York? And this was a really weird series. So, New York seemed to have the kind of the read on Shanghai in the early stages. They get a 2-0 lead at the half, but Shanghai Dragons reverse sweep them for a 3-2 victory. And the worrying thing for New York is that this wasn't Shanghai, completely outplaying them in the second half. This was New York capitulating. They were not good. Huayu's Echo was below par, I would say. I don't think it was brilliant. I think Shanghai were better, and it's a difficult one. Certainly Shanghai didn't have to play to their full potential in that second half of that match to get that reverse sweep. It was definitely more New York falling apart, and that's a shame to see. That is a shame to see. But very good win for Shanghai, and this puts them on top in Asia. It might not last if New York can adapt better. I think New York are still very close to the Shanghai Dragons, if not better. And it does raise the question of who is better, Shanghai or Philadelphia. And again, we're not sure. We're really not sure, and we're not going to get to see them go up against each other in a long time. So, yeah, that's unfortunate. But moving on, later on in the day, we saw Dallas Fuel taking on the Washington Justice. No surprises here. This is exactly what I wanted to see the Dallas Fuel do this week. A 3-0 for the Fuel. We'll see them get a very good victory over the Washington Justice. Once again, the Washington Justice don't look like a team. They look like a bunch of individuals. The teamwork is not there. It's not as big a problem as the Boston Uprising, because in some aspects of the Boston Uprising, the individuals aren't there either. But the Washington Justice, not good. And Dallas Fuel, I mean, their DPS line of Doha and Decay once again ran wild. Decay ran the Tracer, Doha ran the Echo, and they were very, very good. And it's nice to see that Dallas Fuel are really starting to build up a head of steam right now. Unfortunately, they might well run into a brick wall next week. It's a really difficult week next week for the Fuel. But there is very good signs here from the Fuel. Very, very good signs. I think this is the most promising the Fuel have looked in a very long time. So, props to the Dallas Fuel. Moving on now, and we have the Los Angeles Valiant taking on the Atlanta Reign. Now, this is an incredibly interesting match because I have been bigging up the Valiant recently, and it's because I think they've got more quality than perhaps their standings in, well, their place in the standings show right now. And this really does show in this match. So Atlanta Reign, we're talking about a team that is in the chasing pack, so the pack that's chasing after the top 4, I would say right now, which is inclusive of the San Francisco Shock. And Atlanta Reign, we would be expecting them to get a fairly dominant victory over the Valiant, and it doesn't happen. This is yet another reverse sweep. It's 3-2 to the Los Angeles Valiant. So, yeah, Valiant showed us a different lineup slightly in their DPS. No KSP, no KSF, although I think KSP did come in at 1 point for the Ash. They start off with Apply, who we haven't seen this season, but he came in and specialised on the Echo, looked very decent. And then we saw, obviously, Shax. And Shax was on a variety of heroes, but Shax really stood out to me on the Tracer. Really stood out to me on the Tracer. He also had a really good Reaper as well. Really good this week from Shax. And I think he made all the difference for this Valiant side. But the Reign, that's a bad loss for the Reign. And it's a shame because in the first half they were looking really good. Dogman was actually having a really good match. Sharp looked really good on the Echo. And it just kind of fell apart for the Reign. They couldn't see it out. And I think Valiant might be one of these teams that does cause these erroneous results every now and then. We almost saw them do it to the Gladiators the other day. So, yeah, very good win for the Los Angeles Valiant. But moving on to the Houston Outlaws taking on the San Francisco Shock. We thought there was a, I don't know, 10%, 20% chance of an upset here, but it doesn't happen. San Francisco Shock get a 3-0 win over Houston Outlaws. And, yeah, the Shock look good as ever. Rascal looks good as ever, you know. This Shock side is very, very good. I believe we saw Smurf and Choi Hyobin. The whole team was very, very solid once more, and this Shock team is now, once again, starting to build up that head of steam, starting to get a lot of wins on the board. They've caught up now. I believe they're in 4th place, and looking very good. But, moving on to the next day of fixtures on May the 3rd, and we see Seoul Dynasty take on the Hangzhou Spark, and I said it was a really bad week for the Seoul Dynasty. And yes, it continues. Hangzhou Spark get a dominant 3-0 victory over Seoul Dynasty. Seoul Dynasty, oh, possibly the worst week I've ever seen from the Seoul Dynasty. This was not good. They kept trying to force the Echo. It wasn't working. Hangzhou Spark. Adora was really good on the Echo. Really impressed with Adora this week. And actually, it's possibly one of the best weeks I've ever seen Adora have, which is a testament to that, and I think Hangzhou Spark may do very well in this meta. But it will be interesting to see how Seoul Dynasty react to this. They have played 3 matches. They have lost 3-0 in all 3 of those matches. They have not won a single map in those 3 matches. They are 0-9, and that is not the form of a team that wants to be up and around those playoff spots. Let's put it that way. They are now firmly stuck in mid-table with a lot of teams on that even record. So, a lot of work to do at Seoul Dynasty. But hopefully, for them, the meta changes next week when we see the return of McCree and Widowmaker. But moving on, we have Chengdu Hunters taking on New York Excelsior. So New York Excelsior had a very big match to prepare for against the Shanghai Dragons. They did sweep the Chengdu Hunters last week. And Chengdu, remember that Chengdu are a team that thrive in chaos. And they do lose 3-1 to the New York Excelsior, but it's a better look from Chengdu than we saw last week. And this is a Chengdu Hunters that weren't running ball. And they weren't running a lot of their, comfort picks. So I think Chengdu Hunters are starting to be more flexible than they were. New York Excelsior, again, this is exactly the sort of bounce back they needed after the Shanghai Dragons loss. I still think New York are either second or first in Asia. I'd have to give it to second right now because Shanghai Dragons did get that win over them, but it really was the Excelsior's fault that they are not the top team in Asia right now, rather than Shanghai just being better than them. That's all I can say. But moving on, last 3 games in NA, and we had the Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Paris Eternal. So this has always been a close one. But the Paris Eternal are the only team to have beaten the Philadelphia Fusion this year. And it's not going to go that way this time. It's a 3-2 win for the Philadelphia Fusion. It is scary though. It did look very good for the Fusion to start off with. But then Paris Eternal clawed themselves back into it. And Paris Eternal surprised me because I was expecting them to run out with FD God and Grey. They didn't. They ran out with FD God and Fielder. Now, if you didn't hear the news, they have let go of Cruz. Cruz is now with the Toronto Defiant. We didn't see Cruz this weekend for the Defiant though. And they have now signed Fielder from, he was at GC Busan Wave in Korea. And this was, I saw this and I thought, oh, he's a new backup and they're going to run Grey and FD God all the time. But they didn't. They put Fielder straight into the lineup, which is a very big surprise because remember the Paris Eternal are situated in North America and Fielder is still in Korea. So he was playing on 200 ping. And I'm telling you now, he was the best player on them in the match for Paris Eternal. He had the most healing output in the entire match. So I want to give an enormous shout out to Fielder. He had a fantastic week for the Paris Eternal. And if that is anything of a taster for what is to come from Fielder, then Paris Eternal have got a very, very good support on their hands there. So yes, positive signs for the Paris Eternal. Positive signs, but again it is a loss to the Philadelphia Fusion. Philadelphia Fusion looked very good. And something to note with the Philadelphia Fusion this week, there was no Carpe. We did not see Carpe one single bit this week. We saw, the majority of the time, we saw EQO and we saw Hisu, although we did see Ivy in the first map. And EQO's Echo is very, very good. And it's good to see EQO back on the DPS once more, because we've only seen him on the Brig support, I think, this season. So it's good to see Echo, it's good to see EQO back. His Echo was really, really good. Actually, I believe I'm going to name him as probably the best Echo player I saw this weekend. And all around, it was a really good performance from the Philadelphia Fusion. But moving on to Florida Mayhem taking on the Boston Uprising. Once again, there is no change. Well, I say no change. It is a 3-0 for the Florida Mayhem, but it's not as one-sided as it was previously, as we saw it last weekend. Remember, it was the holder for the fastest series in Overwatch League history. It isn't anymore, but it was a better display from Boston this time. They did put up a fight, and there is maybe a glimpse of some very, 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 very slow improvements from the Boston Uprising. There's a very long way to go, but some glimpses of improvement from the Boston Uprising there. And lastly, we had the Toronto Defiant taking on the Los Angeles Gladiators. This one was closer, but a 3-1 win for the Los Angeles Gladiators would see them get the win that perhaps people would expect the Gladiators to get over the Toronto Defiant. Toronto Defiant, I think they have a Carpe issue. And what I mean by a Carpe issue is the Carpe issue from the Fusion last year, where they wholly and solely relied on Carpe, and they have demonstrated this week that they don't rely on Carpe anymore. Hisu and EQA were just good enough. They were not just good enough, that's actually harsh. They were completely good enough. Hisu was fantastic and EQA was fantastic, and so was Ivy. So they actually don't rely on Carpe anymore. Whereas Toronto Defiant, I think, really are relying on Shawful. And I think they're relying on him to take off angles and open up points. And sometimes that can't always be done. That can't be done on third point of Eichenwald. It just can't. because there's not the flank for Shawful to take. Shawful was good on the Ashe, but he, in the end, couldn't make the difference. And the Los Angeles Gladiators was just a better rounded team than the Toronto Defiant. But that rounds us out for the results for Week 13. We will take a look at the standings, and at the top we have the Philadelphia Fusion, the first 10 wins on the board, so congratulations to the Fusion. And in second we see the Shanghai Dragons. That is the top two because it's the only two teams now on one loss. New York Excelsior in third with those 2 losses. Now the San Francisco Shock are breathing down their neck though in fourth because they've been chaining up those wins now. It has been an advantageous week for the London Spitfire, who find themselves in 5th despite not playing. The Spitfire are on a 3-2 record, and so they've kind of been bouncing around the 5th to 8th spot-ish, because a lot of teams are on equal records, 4-4, 5-5, 3-3, 2-2, and so Spitfire are going to be above all of them. But Spitfire are back next week. They take on the Chengdu Hunters, and they take on either Guangzhou or Hangzhou, I can't remember which one it is, but the Spitfire will be back next week, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens with them. And they also have another main tank now in the name of Jihun, also other DPS options like Although. Also, 6th now, Los Angeles Gladiators, all the way up from about 13th, I think, so that's a really good week for the Los Angeles Gladiators. Florida Mayhems find themselves in 7th after their win as well, so it's good weeks for those two teams. Atlanta Reign moving down to 8th because of their loss. Dallas Fuel up to joint 9th with the Paris Eternal, so things looking up at the Fuel. And Seoul Dynasty are also joint 9th now. I mean, they were right at the top fighting out with the Fusion and the Shanghai Dragons. It has been a big fall for them. Vancouver Titans are in 12th. Well, we will see the Vancouver Titans, or what's left of them, next week. Hangzhou Spark will be in 13th. Guangzhou Charge will be in 14th. Toronto Defiant 15th. Los Angeles Valiant 16th. Houston Outlaws in 17th. Chengdu Hunters 18th. Washington Justice 19th. And Boston Uprising 20th. We are seeing a little bit of a gap open up, I think, now, between 14th and 15th, or 15th and 16th, or mainly 16th and 17th. When you look at the gap between the Houston Outlaws and the Los Angeles Valiant in terms of the win-loss ratio now, starting to look a bit chunky. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, and yeah, things are starting to shape up. But next week is a bumper week. We are going to see, I think, about 11 fixtures. We're going to see London Spitfire in action twice, and we're going to see Vancouver Titans again. Whatever remains of that team, it's in ruins at the moment, from what I know. Anyway, it's going to be a really interesting week next week, and we're going to see some interesting people banned. For the first time, Ashe is going to get banned, and for the first time, not for the first time, but finally, Reaper is going to get banned as well. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.